I think I'm good on the mic.
I'm gonna turn the light on here. Say again.
Do I need a mic for them to hear me
I get it.
on Zoom?
You go.
Oh. I sure am. All right, we good? Okay. Assalamualaikum, everybody. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I received kind of a very general guideline on what to talk about today, which was just talk about something related to community. So inshallah today, the title of my talk is media consumption trends and what they can tell us about community ills. So kind of why I decided on this topic. I was at dinner with my friend Sophia, who's on Zoom, last night, and we were kind of catching up. And one of the things that I kind of mentioned offhand that caught her eye was I mentioned how community life and our Islamic obligations don't end, just kind of coming to Jummah, going home. And I have been toying with the idea for a while about what we see on social media, what we see as pop culture trends, and how it might relate to what we're doing in our community and how it may influence folks' interest in the conversations that we're having. So this talk is going to kind of be modeled after a couple of the series that Imam Shuaib did out in California, just really thinking about how our community life extends far beyond what we do within the four walls of the mosque, and how on some level we do need to engage with the conversations that are happening around us. So I wanted to ground the conversation in a hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, where it was attributed to him saying, "The best of people are those who are most beneficial to others or to people in their community." And I think that truly we're the most beneficial to our communities when we can effectively pair sorry, we're having tech moment. I want to make sure we're all good. Thank you. So like I was mentioning, we're most beneficial to the community around us when we can effectively pair pure intentions, Islamic knowledge with nasiha or guidance, and engage in relevant conversations that are relevant to the folks that are around us and folks that we might not be engaging as frequently as we would like. So one of the conversations that Sophia and I had last night, just kind of briefly, was around kind of very much so an former English teacher concern around media literacy. One of the things that I've noticed and people talk about when they talk about the ills of social media is that, there's a decline in young people's ability to understand what they're looking at, and that it creates this shortened attention span and weakens the desire to seek knowledge independently. And I share some of those concerns, but I also think that when we start talking about literacy in general, or people's ability to understand what they're looking at, reading, engaging with, oftentimes I think those conversations are really boring. And I often find that they're very elitist and they can be really dismissive of young people's interests and concerns. So today I wanted to take some time to look at what people are talking about, and see if there's any way for us to draw connections between those conversations that are happening kind of in a secular lens with the conversations that we're trying to have as an Islamic community, and the work that we're trying to do to build kind of new Africa or an Islamic community in our faith. So I wanted to chat a little bit about what people are engaging with. So this is going to be kind of a different approach than what I typically do, in that I kind of took time to look at, okay, what are the things that caught my attention over the past year? What are the conversations that I saw people having on the internet or having with each other that don't necessarily have a direct line to, an Islamic, context, but that I think are very telling about what our communities are going through. And see if there's a way for us to engage in those conversations themselves, or conversations around those themes, so that we're really speaking to what people are, their lived experiences and what they're concerned about. So I think like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I went with my uncle and my grandma and my mom to see Wicked. So if you haven't seen that movie yet, highly recommend. But I am going to kind of take a page out of Imam Fahim Shuaib's book and kind of talk about some of the themes of that movie, and how I think its popularity can really tell us what people are interested in right now and what societal conversations people are having. So if you don't know, that movie is a retelling of the Wizard of Oz, and it is kind of from the perspective of the Wicked Witch of the West. And in this film, but also in the book and the play, the Wicked Witch of the West is like a racialized woman. So she's green. If you've ever seen kind of images of the film or the play. And she's fighting for marginalized people after decades of systemic oppression. But it's very clearly framed as her being wicked or evil for those acts, right? And so some of the themes of that movie include systemic oppression, like I mentioned, self-discovery, racism. And it was very interesting to watch that movie and to watch the general public's reaction to that film, especially folks who hadn't seen the play or read the book, because it speaks to some of the discontent that we're seeing in our communities more broadly when we talk about what it is like to be, for example, a Black woman in America, and any level of discontent is viewed as sometimes criminal, but definitely as something to be hidden away. And so I think that it's really interesting to watch people who may not otherwise engage in political conversations. They may not be engaging in conversations around race or oppression or systematic oppression, especially in this country. Being able to identify the wrong in a fictional movie or play, right? Another thing, another piece of media I consumed over the past year, there's a book. Yes.
Can you just give context to, because I didn't see the movie.
Yeah, sure.
Was it popular, and what was the discourse?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so it is extremely popular. I think part of that popularity was at least due to the main cast being really, really popular. So Ariana Grande plays one of the witches, so she's like a huge pop star. Cynthia Erivo, who has done really incredible work on Broadway. I think she was one of the original cast, well, maybe not the original cast, but she became really famous for playing a part in The Color Purple. And so that was a part of that popularity. But what I saw was young people who, may not really be engaging who definitely didn't engage in this media before. That book, Wicked, is like 28 years old. And for folks who weren't engaging in that conversation through that story around that specific example of systemic oppression and the way that we frame people who fight against that, or how the state will frame people who fight against those ills in society. We frame them as evil or disruptive, right? I'm talking about Wicked. Y'all went to see it with me. Come on. Sorry, y'all. My grandma and my aunt came in. So it was very interesting to see the level of conversation, especially a piece of media that folks don't always engage with, right? So it's a musical. And to see folks who went into the theater being like, oh man, my girlfriend's dragging me in to see this musical about a green lady, and walk out not only in tears probably, but also walk out really interested in how Elphaba, who's the kind of green wicked witch of the West, is framed by her community as evil and something to be destroyed and killed, right? And we've seen that in real life. We've seen the way that, especially during the civil rights movement, people were surveilled. There were active campaigns to ensure that we felt a certain type of way about people who are trying to make our society better. And so I think it was really interesting to see the way that folks who otherwise, wouldn't have those conversations were having it in the context, because media makes these conversations more approachable. When you frame things through books and TV and movies and songs, people are more likely to have the conversation than they otherwise would be if we sit there and we have, a really dry conversation about these topics. Another piece of media that I consumed this year that kind of in the book realm was talked about quite a bit. There was a book called Sky Full of Elephants by Sibo Campbell. And the synopsis or the thesis of that book is what would happen if all the white people in the United States walked into the nearest body of water and drowned themselves. What becomes of our country, right? I think to even have that thesis statement, to even talk about that, it speaks to how Black Americans feel right now. To even have that be a book, to even have that be a conversation where folks are saying, what if our oppressors disappeared? What becomes of us? Because we spend a lot of time talking about getting free. And it was really fascinating to see a piece of media and to see people engage with a piece of media that talks about what comes after. So instead of just sitting in the rage of the moment because we are dealing with the oppression, what would we do differently if we got the opportunity? And I think that as an Islamic community, we can absolutely leverage conversations like that. And when folks are becoming engaged in, whether it be, liberation politics or whatever you want to call it, when folks are expressing an interest in that, are we at the table to bring an Islamic perspective to that conversation? We can't do that if we're not paying attention. If we're not engaging with the media, how are we going to capture the attention of folks when that is their entry point? I think one of the things that is really important for us to consider is that, especially with young folks, especially with folks who, I know in certain circles they'll call it unchurched, folks who still have a connection to a higher power but have removed themselves from like a kind of a structured religious community, right? For folks like that, when they want to engage in these deeper discussions, one of their main entry points is going to be social media, because that's where you find like minds. And are we in those spaces? Are we having conversations with those different pockets of community around us? I think that that's why media can be one of the most effective vehicles to do that. And so that's one of the things that I really have been digging into and just thinking about, and I'm curious, and this is definitely not just a me talking at you conversation, so feel free to jump in, but I think when I was reading that book that's saying, okay, what would happen to us if our oppressors disappeared overnight? What would happen? I think it's really important to consider what societal conditions have to already exist for that kind of media to be created, for that question to be posed. What are people really dealing with, and why are people attracted to that concept or to that idea, right? Why did that book take off? Why were people engaging with it? And so those are the kinds of things that I've just been pondering. Another thing that I've been yapping, especially my father and my brother's ear off about, has been I'm going to do a bit of a pivot and show kind of, I don't know if that's showing my age really, but there was a really big hip hop controversy this year that I don't know if you guys engaged with, but I definitely did, which was Drake versus Kendrick Lamar. And I have talked my father's ear off about that debate, right? And he posed a really great question to me actually earlier today, which was, how are you going to connect this to our Islamic life? Like, how are you going to come in this space and start talking about hip hoppers, right? And I think it's because of the themes that I found within that conversation. So for folks that don't know, Drake and Kendrick Lamar are two rappers who are very, very popular. They're considered to be among the top three in the world. And for context, Drake is a Canadian who was raised by a white mama, but rose to stardom for his ability to create bops. Great bops. Loved it. Who I'm rooting for? Yeah, definitely, right? And then Kendrick Lamar is a conscious rapper from Compton, California. No, but I think that what I found so fascinating about that conversation that I saw on the internet was there are always going to be folks who find that are in community with you, whether you want them to be or not, and who appropriate culture, who use culture for financial gain, but don't necessarily give back. And so one of the quotes that kind of came out of, actually I think this happened before the beef, so to speak, but one of the quotes that came out of this conversation around, why is Drake, for example, this kind of, half white Canadian kid, why is he so popular, and why is he kind of seen as a pinnacle of hip hop, which historically is rooted in the oppression of Black folks, what folks were seeing in their real lives. How did he become so popular, right? And so Yassine Bey, or Mos Def, was asked a question about Drake, if he viewed Drake as being hip hop. And he spoke to something after getting a couple jokes off, spoke to something that I thought was really profound when he said, what happens when this whole thing collapses? Buying and selling, which is really the core of Drake's artistry, is very consumerism focused. It's very, I'm better than everyone else. And there's not really a message beyond that, right? I'm the best, which is a great message. There are days where you need to hear that and feel that, right? But hip hop historically has spoken to police brutality, has historically spoken to systemic impoverishment of communities, has spoken to violence that folks have seen, trauma that folks have endured. And when hip hop is absent of that, when we exist in a space where that's not present, right? What happens? Especially in the society we're living in right now, right? So Mos Def kind of says, buying and selling, where is the message I can use, right? That is such a profound question for kind of all of the media that we're consuming right now. What is the actual message that I can take away from this? If you asked my brother about why I am pro Kendrick, anti Drake, he would say because, I'm boring. But I think for me, really what it is if you go and look at I have a media list at the end of this presentation, and one of the ones that I put on there is one of Kendrick Lamar's albums, which is To Pimp a Butterfly. That entire album is a concept about what it is like to grow up in Black America under systemic oppression, right? There are messages in that. There's a song in there called How Much Does a Dollar Cost? And it talks about, it kind of starts with, the protagonist interacting with an unhoused person on the street who's asking for $1. And it's like, man, I need $1 too. Like, you need to go hustle and get it yourself. I need $1 too, right? When I look at that, and then I look at Drake's entire discography, I don't really see the message that folks can take away, right? And one of the kind of overarching pieces that kind of was a takeaway from that battle was there's a line that Kendrick says, which is, I'm what the culture's feeling. And so he spoke for all of Black America really in that moment, and objectively won. And so there is something to be said for, we talk sometimes about, young people are listening to kind of this mindless media, and we're engaging in these things that aren't based in history, aren't based in Islam or religion overall. And I don't think that's true, to be honest. I think that when you pay attention to how people reacted to these two rappers going back and forth, really what it spoke to was people saying, yeah, at the end of the day, I do need some substance in this. Like, it's great, and, the bops are fun, but at the end of the day, you are, in fact, an outsider, and we're going to go with home team. And I think that that is something that's actually very, very important to consider. Yes.
What do you think that commercialization of rap, that influence have over the genre itself?
Yeah. I think that a question that we're asking right now, because really what that beef did was pair, the messaging and the kind of original intent of hip hop against kind of what it's become in certain spaces, right? Or what has been uplifted, right, in the genre. I think that one of the questions that we're walking away with is it enough to produce capitalistic, kind of nihilistic, content right now? When we look at the election, when we look at the social ills that folks are facing right now, when we look at that, when we look at the erosion of social services and the reliance that people are having to have on each other and community, it's not enough. And I think that's really ultimately what folks said was, it's great for a club banger, but folks can't even afford to buy a bottle in the club right now. So I don't think that is ultimately what people are asking for right now. And so I think that it is important for us to take note of what people are engaging with, what they're agreeing with. And I think that when we dig into it, we're finding nuggets of gold that we can really apply to our community life as well. I think that when we see the general public, who we would otherwise think is not engaged in some of these discussions, but when we see them say, yeah, no, I'm gonna have to go over here with substance. I'm going to go on the side of substance and community and all of that, the real big song that, kind of ended that conversation was Not Like Us, right? You're not like us. And we're going to go with Home Team, for lack of a better term. I think that really does speak to that there are still threads of community, even when folks have been isolated throughout the pandemic, even when folks are dealing with heavy levels of grief, heavy levels of economic struggle, people are still choosing community. And how do we take that and apply it and bring people into the conversations we're trying to have? Yeah. Do you have?
I just want to make a comment in regards to, in both of the examples of really just providing an avenue to have a conversation around other social and moral issues that are happening and providing a platform for that to happen. So when the whole Drake Kendrick thing went down, some of the things that came out, like with my kids, was just around like, well, look at how he treats women. And look at how he's running around this, that, whatever. So it really brought out some of their behaviors and who they were as people. And so you saw just that thread of like, there is a sense of built-in morality within people. And when you just commercialize and put a spotlight on, you can call women this, that, and whatever. Exactly. You can, you're not pimping a butterfly, you're pimping women, whatever, like you're having kids, this and that, you're drugging people. All of that stuff started coming out and people were having a conversation around, is that really okay? Do we feel safe physically, psychologically in this community where we're just, objectifying women over and over and over? And so I just feel that, a lot creates kind of these conditions to not only have the conversation, but ask people to seek higher ground. Like what we're doing, just getting through, it's not gonna sustain us. Right. And it's already failing. So people are looking around like, what is the answer? What am I looking for? One of the things I didn't like about it, or that I didn't like that it highlighted, was really just the dysfunction within our communities. Because again, at the end of the day, Drake is still a black man. I don't care who he was raised by, he still is going to be seen as a black man, and two black men are going head to head once again of this crab in a barrel, the fighting, the instability or whatever, and it just really gets into like our own family,
that whole narrative,
our whole family situations. Like, why can't we stabilize after all these years? Why are we still kind of being, pulled into this muck? So we really have to find a new way to relate to each other, whether it's not like, don't dismiss me because I'm not on social media, and I'm not a social media person. Don't dismiss me because of that, but you do need to tune into what people are talking about, and don't just, categorize all of it as, oh, well, that's just junk. We don't have to, just filter it out, because that's not accurate. The same thing with Wicked. I'm also thinking of the Barbie movie, which I didn't see when it was in the movies, but I saw it after. But just the themes that came out of Barbie, just being, categorized. She was, totally stereotyped into who you can be and what, And so some of her moral questions were coming out about women, who we are, and like our futures and stuff, and how she really wanted Ken to be like that support, but find the right way to support her. So, I mean, I think you're right that these moral questions are coming out. They're just being presented in a different way, and just having those two paths of like conscious culture versus just getting another dollar.
Yeah, and how can we engage in those conversations, like when these conversations are happening, right? So there was this entire conversation around one of the lyrics from the battle that I put in my slide was, at one point Drake, is talking about Kendrick, and he says, "You always rapping like you're trying to free the slaves." And the general public's reaction to that line was, you're not from a history of folks who were enslaved. You don't get to use that as a bar, right? Like, that's not a moment that you get to capitalize off of to, get one up, right? But I think people are paying attention, but I think that they are engaging in media because it's the most easily accessible, because they don't, moral lessons are weaved into something that is easier to digest, right? If we talk about a movie, we talk about a song, we talk about anything like that, right? You can take the message or you can't, but the message is there, right? And when people show interest, they start to dig. And so when that happens, how are we going to capitalize off of that moment? When our children are paying attention to something like a rap battle, right? And there are actual conversations being had about human trafficking, and there's actual conversations being had about what does community mean? Who gets to belong? How do we self-check each other in community? We need to bring that into what we're talking about, right? And I think ultimately that is what I've been wrestling with. Yeah.
I think for us, we have to almost look at it from, like, not being a part of the cycle of the culture, but kind of being outside looking in. Because if we're just as consumed as part of it, we're not helping people. So,
Yeah.
for example, we know that the whole industry is designed to make money, both sides.
Yep.
And we know that the human soul is prone to certain types of things, like the beats itself. So, like, yes, I can be debating Kendrick versus Drake, but both of them have CDs that will distract me from my purpose. I can just sit and listen to the Kendrick songs all day, and I'm not productive. So I think we should just be able to help the people see the things that they're missing from the larger discussion.
Yeah.
So whether it be the relationships, systemic racism, where does racism come from? So instead of us being consumed with the lyrics, we need to bring the spotlight to the larger thing within the human family.
Yeah.
That just takes making connections.
Yeah. So
And that's what I was getting at, and I did challenge Naima when I was hearing the outline of a presentation, because I am really intrigued. I'm trying to step back and say, as a Muslim, and particularly if I were a younger Muslim, how does all this beef tie into my Islamic life? What am I supposed to draw from this? And I'm hearing what you're saying about, we almost can't get consumed with this. I won't say nonsense. I shouldn't say. We get consumed with that. We've got to be almost above it. And so
It's
I
just
think
like,
that's challenge.
But there's
But-
a but though, Brian, and the but is that everybody is affected by the culture, whether they're aware of it or not. I may not know rap music, but it certainly has a lot of influence. I went to Germany years ago, and all I saw was on the walls in the city, Munich, where rap artists had been there. And I asked the interpreter, I said, well, and before I could get it out of my mouth, he said, man, rap is big in Germany. So that means it's in Germany. So now what about us in this society? All the commercials.
It's everything.
Yeah, it's everywhere. So the culture is like the air we breathe. You know, you're not aware you breathe. You're not really aware you're breathing air unless there's a odor that you don't recognize. So that's how dangerous Allah said it was when the Shaitan says in the Quran that he was going to surround the human person. Imam Muhammad said that's the culture.
Yeah.
He gets in the culture, he influences the culture. So it's something we all have to become as aware of as we can. Because when a person is, psychology says when you are aware, it's harder to be conditioned. Like the Pavlov experiment. So culture is something that grows, you know. It grows, it starts from something small.
It's not static.
Right. So therefore, we're born into this culture, and we're not aware of it because you can't experience it with your five senses. So the average person is a victim. One last statement. Imam Muhammad told us he was convinced that America was established to be modern Egypt, and the oppressive Pharaoh was the culture.
Yeah.
I think Naila is challenging that you are trying to engage within the culture to bring people out of that same state of mind, right?
Yeah.
How are you gonna create
So
a discourse around it, a conversation around it?
yeah, so we could isolate, and we could only speak to Quran and Sunnah, and we could just get a circle of us and we could stay in that all day long, and we could try to insulate ourselves and only speak to those lessons from history. But I think it is more productive for us to see what people are talking about, to pull the themes out, which is really what I was doing, right? So pulling the themes out from this discussion and then seeing how it applies to the community we already exist in. So when we're looking at whether it be that, Kendrick Lamar beef or not, if we're looking at people are starting to have discussions about, and very vocally have discussions about abuse of women, viewing women as objects, the abuse that can occur when we talk about power dynamics in women, right? Especially young women, which was something that unfortunately came up, right? One of the other conversations that I saw this year was around a Quranic teacher who was arrested for abusing a young woman, actually a young girl, and leveraged his Islamic authority or communal authority with her mother to facilitate that abuse. And that was a conversation that I mainly saw Black Muslim women having in the spaces on social media. But that was a very intense conversation that happened in our community. And we're not immune to being presented with something like that. And so I always think that when I look at the arrest of Sean Diddy Combs, right, when I'm looking at all of these things that are popping up in our society, I'm trying to see what people are saying. A lot of the times, if you look at social media, people are sharing from their own personal experiences too, right? So there will be a overarching topic, there will be a news headline, and then there will be people saying, we've known that since 1992. There will be people saying, I experienced this in my life, so I believe what they're saying. Or people saying, I have historically seen XYZ. And so I do think it's very important for us to not just look at people engaging with it. I do think negativity fuels things, right? So I think that when you're talking about a rapper beef, there is negativity, and we've seen actual harm come out of things like that, right? But we're also having very in-depth discussions that we can view as a positive. So another kind of, media firestorm that occurred was the murder of the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson. And I saw what I view to be a misinterpretation of the general public's reaction, especially on social media. So if you didn't see it, the CEO of United Healthcare, which is one of the largest healthcare organizations in the U.S., was murdered in Uptown Manhattan. And the general response that you would have seen on Twitter or Instagram or some of these other social media sites was glee.
It wasn't outrage.
Was glee. Was he deserved it, right? One of the quotes that I saw was, I'm sorry, my thoughts and prayers are out of network, was a reaction that I saw. And and I saw some political commentators and some of these folks reacting to what they were seeing, saying, basically, these people are heartless. And these people who are doing these reactions, who are saying these things, are, completely disregarding the humanity of this person. Frankly, I don't think they even cared about his humanity. They're just trying to defend against what they view as being a unacceptable take to someone's loss of life. I saw TikToks of people, kind of humorously providing alibis to the alleged killer after he was arrested, right? Frustration at the person who turned him in was present on social media, right? And I think we do, as a religious community, ask why social media express so little sympathy. What does this tell us about healthcare in this country? What does it tell us about people's emotional state, their tolerance for oppressive systems, right? What is that? What are the gaps in this system that community can fill? What are the, how can we support liberation instead of sitting in kind of really crass celebration of someone being murdered, right? So instead of that, I think instead of saying, these people are mean, right? I think people started to dig into, okay, why, United Healthcare in general, what is it about United Healthcare? And one of the things that we saw was that United Healthcare has the most denials of any healthcare company in this country. Around 37% of what people say they need, what people's doctors send in and say they need, is rejected. 37% of what people are asking for. That is life-saving medication. Those are surgeries. Those are efforts to keep people healthy and well, right? Things that Islamically, they should have an obligation to do, right? But there is a rejection of it. And one of the things that I saw happen after that murder, right? Blue Cross Blue Shield had just made an announcement that they were going to not always pay for anesthesia for surgeries. And they reversed that very quickly after that killing, right? You also saw people, engaging with the idea of universal health care, something that they had been trying to push in this country for a very, very long time, right? That hasn't been successful. You also saw something that I thought was really telling was a lot of corporations remove the names and faces of their board members from their websites immediately. We can call it a vigilante killing. We can say, to kill one person is to have killed all of humanity. To save one person is like saving all of humanity, right? We can say that. But we do need to engage with why thousands and thousands and thousands of people had very little empathy for loss of life. And how do we pivot people from that reaction to something that is Islamic, emotionally healthy, and results in freedom and liberation and safety and health, right? How do we take that reaction and not just shame people for it? I think that there's a danger in just wagging our finger at people when we see a reaction that we don't agree with. I think it's really important for us to see that reaction and to ask why people reacted that way. And that's something that I've been trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that, like people, at least like people in power, I guess, or like people like don't, they don't process, like, you know, like when a CEO, like, you know, is denying his healthcare and a person dies, it's kind of like a distanced murder, if you want to call it that, a distanced murder, because like it's not like the business like went out, took out a gun, and like started shooting his own like client and everything. Like it was like, oh well, we're sorry, we can't do this. And then the person dies, it's like, oh, it's just a circumstance thing. Whereas like the suspect who actually killed the CEO, he actually took out a gun and shot the person himself. So that's why I feel like a lot of people, I guess some people are like, oh, you can't do what the suspect did, but you can do what the CEO did. 'Cause like it's like a, you know, like a 5-step thing away from like actually killing somebody.
Yeah, and when we're trying to build community, it includes all of these aspects, right? So community life includes healthcare. Community life includes entertainment, and media consumption and all of that, right? We we can take lessons from what we've seen. We can take warning signs, and we can also take proactive steps to ensure that what we are trying to build is inclusive of the folks that are the most marginalized. When we look at how we're going to incorporate or you know what policies we fight for, right? We can mobilize the folks who are getting those jokes off, right? So those folks who, you know, said, I mean, oh well, right? To someone's killing, right? We can bring them into conversations about what healthcare would look like ideally, right? We can,
What they can do to feel
yeah,
empowered, right, to reduce that feeling of just like it doesn't matter. You
Yeah.
dehumanize this person.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to layer that moral compass on top of, because people feel, just inherently know that it is wrong to, you know, to have some of these policies of just like outright denials.
Yeah.
People are saying goodbye to family members, people are, you know, and it's like, oh, thoughts and prayers. So when someone says, oh, my thoughts and prayers are out of network, it's kind of like, you have treated us in an inhumane way. You're not honoring our sacred trust to, we pay the money in, we expect that we're gonna have value for the resources that we have, you know, that we're paying for, and yet we're not getting any value for it. So it was almost like a Robin Hood type of a situation
Yeah.
of like, okay, they took one of them out. But again, that wasn't morally, it wasn't the right thing to kill him, but also morally, healthcare companies, insurance companies, it's improper for them to take some of these policies of like denials when people are entitled to those benefits, but what was driving it is just like the Wicked, it's just like, you know, the Drake versus Kendrick, it was all money.
Profit.
And we're applying that in a healthcare setting, and they just said it's okay because it's a white collar crime. Whereas if this is like, okay, this guy, he has actual health issues and health challenges,
Yeah.
you know? So maybe he's just dealt with the frustration of that or whatever, and he felt desperate. So just being aware that, you know, what does the law say about that? You know, what does the law say about oppression? How should we really interact with each other? How do we give, proper relations to people? How do we treat them with humanity and respect, so that we don't have policies that are just completely heinous, against your own population, where you're valuing dollars over human life. And I feel that environmentally in our country in general over the last however many years, right, since these prior administrations, there's just a general sense of like, I don't really have to care about what I do, how it impacts you. I don't have to care about that.
Yeah.
It doesn't, what's it to me? It doesn't matter.
I don't know who was first.
I think what helps us with this, because we should be engaging in these conversations, like that the culture is presenting to us. But if we are using like the Quranic lens, I think it helps us most. Like if you think of the big discussion that was last couple of years, like men versus women, gender roles, get married, Kevin Samuels, Andrew Tate, all that stuff. People are engrossed in this, and it's to the point where if you took a room of young people or single people, they can't seem to get out of the process of where they fall on these issues. We come in and we don't shy away from the conversation, but we bring the perspective of, hey, this is the compliment for us. Like the spouse, we're going to start from the point of everything in nature has pairs, and my spouse, whether I'm the husband or the wife or the husband, is a compliment. And if you just start from that premise, it kind of like inserts something into the conversation where these, without it being inserted, you're never going to get out of the loop of what the society. And the one thing we have to be mindful of is we know, like, these social media platforms are designed to continue this. So we have no way of, like, maybe the things that are said that are balanced, that are helpful, that are like empathy are like filtered out. So me as a Muslim knowing that, hey, they want to see me on this website and this debate endlessly. So I have to bring that to my mind. I'm not gonna go tell my son, he was debating some like Christians on social media. I said, Reese, you should also read the Quran, because this debate will never end. The design is to have you on the internet debating Jesus or whatever for the rest of your life, and you'll never pick up. So we have to be mindful that their job is to keep us on this platform.
Yeah.
Keep you looped
Yeah.
in, keep you.
So when we think about those algorithms, right, because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about if you engage with things that you dislike, the algorithm doesn't know the difference, right? So Idris will be debating a Christian for the rest of ever. He will be on the internet, right? If I made a pact with myself in probably 2018 to not argue with anybody in a comment section ever again. I'm never having that debate ever again, because there's nothing there's nothing I can tell you. I could give you every source. I could give you everything, and your response is going to be whatever. Like, I mean, that's, and
But AI, you may not
yeah.
even be debating a person.
And so when I say that we need to engage in these conversations, we do. Now, does that need to be directly on social media? Not necessarily. It can be the conversation with your child. It can be a conversation with your friend. It can be a conversation with people that you see day to day, right? You could also use social media and have your own platform, right? We've got a YouTube channel. So if we want to have these conversations, we can still have those conversations. We can do a fun thumbnail and an interesting title, and the algorithm will work for you if folks start clicking it. Whether they like it or not, it doesn't even matter at this point, because we've hidden likes and dislikes on YouTube, for example. So we can say the most unpopular perspective. Islamic perspectives aren't always going to be popular, right? And we know that. So even if it's not a popular take, if people engage with it, people see it. And I think that is something that we could use to our advantage.
I know that Imam Rashad, he does that. Like, he'll say, is Black America dead? Like,
Yeah.
just throw something out there that's like, let me listen to this talk. And then next thing you know, you're listening to his whole presentation. He's asked questions or whatever. But the thing about social media is just like a one-way type of a deal. You can't really get the interplay of, what is your actual experience, and people like they have all these confessions online or whatever. But it's just kind of like, okay, if you want to make positive statements, you can make affirmatory statements. You can bring Islam into the conversation. You can say that word that's directed to the right and then leave it. Somebody's probably read that comment or whatever. You don't have to go back and forth. So I like how Imam Rashad does use that in his platform to ask those questions that will grab your attention. It brings you in, and he's able to share those foundational Islamic nuggets once you're clicking on it. I mean, maybe it's clickbait, but it still will grab your attention because you are competing in a very, there's so much stuff just out there.
Yeah, and I also think that one of the questions that I put in my presentation is kind of what makes our community equipped to discuss these themes. And what I will say is that our community is optimally positioned to engage in a lot of these discussions. For one, we're indigenous to this place, right? I mean, we were brought here on ships, but when you think about who has existed here for a very long time, when we hear this phrase, BIPOC community, it's kind of been watered down to include anybody with a drop of melanin in their skin. BIPOC is usually how you'll see it. It's like an acronym that you'll see sometimes. And what it stands for is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Really what that original intent of that phrase was to connect Black Americans and Indigenous communities and the histories of our communities and how we are incredibly tied to this land, and we have a rich history that we can draw from to talk about modern day conversations. So when we look at what's happening now, when we look at these conversations on social media or just generally we see headlines, we're uniquely positioned because we know the history. We can pull from lived experiences of our, forefathers. We can pull from knowledge and deep engagement with the text, which, I started this presentation by talking about media literacy and my concern for the babies who are only ingesting 30-second, TikToks. One of our most, in my view, one of the most powerful advantages that we have is that we have been encouraged for decades to read the text. Islam overall encourages a reading of the text. There isn't an intermediary like we see in especially certain aspects of Christianity, right? There aren't saints that we're going through, right? There isn't an expectation that you only go and listen to the Jummah and you never engage more deeply with the text yourself. We are encouraged to go every Ramadan to go grab the Quran and look at it with our own eyes, right? And I think that because of that, we're uniquely positioned to show people how to engage with the media that they're consuming kind of passively, right? To draw out the themes that we're seeing and talk about them more broadly. Usually when I'm talking about these things that I mentioned today, that's a hook. That isn't the entire discussion, right? But we can do a title that's the Islamic takeaways from Drake versus Kendrick, right? And we could do that, right? And somebody's gonna click on it because they're like, why the heck are Muslims out here talking about this? I know everybody else was engaged. Why are y'all talking about it, right? But we can take that and have a more in-depth discussion, and we can use those things as a hook to get people to pay attention again, right? Attention spans are extremely short right now. And people are under a level of pressure. Everyone's under a level of pressure. I think it's one of the reasons, one, section that I'm not really going to touch a ton, but was the 2024 election. And I think one of the messaging issues that I saw, and I saw some folks shout it from the rooftops and didn't actually get heard by Kamala Harris's campaign. But one of the messaging issues that she had was the economy's fine. We're doing okay. Inflation, y'all, we worked on it. All is well. Nobody cares about that when they go to the grocery store. That's all well and good. You can say it all day long. You can say it all day long, and I'm sure you got the stats to back it up. You got a bunch of Harvard-educated folks that can back it up, right? But when folks go in their lived realities and they're not seeing the benefit that you talk about, that's a problem, right? And that's something that we need to be mindful of. When we want to speak about something, right? When we want to raise awareness around anything, you need to be aware of how people are feeling. And social media has been one of the most effective places that you can get a very high level generalized view of how people are feeling about something. I don't know if media corporations thought there was any weight in discussing healthcare outside of our general talking points we always do, right? You know, the Democrats are going to say we should have, you know, Obamacare or Medicare for all, right? But they're still going to be focused on the bottom line of filling CEOs' pockets, right? And then you have, you know, and then you have the reality of folks saying, I really don't care, you know, who's responsible for any of this. At the end of the day, I watched my mother be denied chemotherapy treatments, be denied a nausea medication, and I saw day in and day out the reality of what that was. I think that it is important for us to look at what people are saying. And again, I think that we are really equipped to have those conversations. I don't think all Islamic communities are equipped to have that discussion, especially in the United States. Like when you think about, we have seen so much, we've experienced so much. We can pull those conversations and pull Quran and pull Sunnah, right? And have a more well-rounded discussion than I think a lot of people are. Yeah.
Since you opened the door,
Oh no, what did I do?
I think, so we know in Surah Baqarah it talks about a people who say they're with you, but when they leave, they're not. I think we had a huge dosage of that when we look at where we were as a country, from people who we thought would be allies in just goodness, and truth, and honesty, and justice, and fairness, and from the Muslim perspective, we thought that we had more alliances with brothers and sisters on certain issues, and I think it showed us that what you hear people say is not really what they often make believe in their heart. It's probably the biggest lesson we've ever gotten. And I think the right thing is the right thing, and when I get behind the door, I'm going to do something different.
Yep.
So it shows you that even when people say, you got to be mindful that when the heart is diseased, it may not go the way you want.
Yeah.
So many regular people who were like, oh, I support what's fair and what's right, we don't want a felon, and then the next day, the opposite happened. How did that happen?
Yeah.
You said one thing when we were all this other stuff, and when we get behind a closed door, it's something different.
Yeah.
So we learn. I think we just learned a real lesson in that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a, I was a little bit earlier, it was like, there is a hadith that I think a lot of some Muslims like misinterpret for one, but it's when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was like saying, don't rebel against a leader until he prevents you from making salah and everything. So once he does that, then rebel, do the whatever you gotta do, protest, rebel, whatever. But a lot of Muslims say that to me, I don't care how bad this dictator is, keep them in charge unless they do something really, really bad. And it's like he's already doing really, really bad stuff. What more do you need to do? And I think that's what Nate was talking about, how you were saying that people are with us who say one thing but do something else. It's that situation. And it's not just even in the U.S. Like, I'm talking about in Syria and everything, how if anyone's been watching the news, Bashar al-Assad. Yeah. It really is Bashar al-Assad was recently taken out of power. And now there's political backing and everything, a bunch of rebel groups are oh, I want to do this, I want to do this thing, I want to do this thing, and now they're all fighting too to get power. And there were some people who were like, no, we should keep that president in charge, even though he was a really, really bad person. He put a bunch of innocent people in jail and tortured them for decades. He kept them in prison for again, decades. Being with him and his father, and who were like, oh no, it's fine, he didn't. Well, he still allows to pray, so.
Yeah.
Jonathan, one thing you're bringing up is people have an ability to separate the folks' actions. It's never going to get to me. It's never going to impact me. It's never going to impact me. Well, if they're saying this group is on the way coming up, well, I can identify with that group, so I should be protected. And within a few minutes, you found out real quick, no, you're not who they were talking about. And people, they have such a low level of information, and that's the thing about, like you were saying, read the text, but overall, it's an overall theme of educate yourself. Be educated, be informed, so that when people come in and tell you anything, you will have the benefit of discernment to say, that's not true. We can't go this way. We cannot allow X, Y, and Z to happen because, yes, it does impact me. It will impact me. And even if it doesn't directly today, it's going to impact my neighbor. And I don't want that to happen to them. So being able to just separate that out, I think people have done a great job of just saying, the blowback won't come back to me, so it's okay. I'll just allow it.
Yeah.
I'll allow it, and I'll allow it, and then, next thing you know, oh, mass graves. Where did all that stuff come from? Next thing you know, it's like, I look for comments on Sudan. The genocide happening in Sudan. Not a word. Nobody cares about the black genocide. Oh, but we really do care about this genocide. It's like all of it is disgusting. But it's that value of like how much does a dollar cost? How much is human life cost? So it's like each individual person, you're worth it because of your skin tone. So I'm gonna care about this, but I'm not gonna care about this because you're outside of me. It doesn't impact me. And so you'll just allow these atrocities to just keep going. But, as Muslims, we can't support either one of those. Any old kind of oppression, we cannot support that. So, we have to be in the room, we have to be in the conversation so that people understand, like, no, that's not okay. And even just mobilizing, so, you said, like, short attention span, people can do shorts, but also they can be involved in their local community that will not put these folks in power who have these very macabre ideas about, how you can treat people.
Yeah, I think ultimately what we're talking about here is how do we leverage our knowledge and in the history that is in our bones, that we know it when we see it, how do we leverage that in a society that we're seeing a great level of apathy and we're seeing a great level of like exhaustion and being fed up? How do we engage with those folks? How do we bring them back to believing that something can change? And I think that sometimes that is through media, right? When you see people engage with a hopeful thought, I think it's important to grab it, to digest it, and to rework it into something Islamic so that we can present it back to them in a way that's digestible, right? So I spent a lot of time kind of talking about these different kind of social media firestorms, things that I've seen, but I also think those are warnings for how people are feeling. Those are warnings to us about how, what's happening in the world, right? We can study abuses of power and make sure it doesn't happen here. Like, we can study what people get away with, that kind of thing, and apply it to our own communities so that we can raise alarm bells when we see it, so that we can reframe when we see an unhelpful approach to a conflict, right? We can readjust those things. So I think ultimately that was my goal. I wanted to end kind of with an ayah from Surah Al-Imran 110, where it says, you are the best nation produced as an example for mankind. So in order for us to be an example, we have to be able to synthesize, for lack of a better word, our lessons and our morality and our approach to life You have to be able to deliver that in a way that people listen. And this is, this conversation is just one suggestion. It's just one option. It's going to take a multi-factored approach. Like, we can't just be pop culture folks. Like, we can't only get up, every Juma and before we go on, we scroll and we look and see, what are people talking about today? All right, I guess we're talking about Diddy today. Like, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting, though, is to not only, practice, educating ourselves, but to figure out how we can educate folks who may not be ready to engage in a super, academic discussion about misogynoir, right? Like, how do we engage people in these very complex discussions, meet people where they're at? How do we do that? And I think that part of that is paying attention and pulling the themes like I did today. Yeah.
I think when I answer your question about how do we get people scrapping the discussions, I think part of it is just when you were talking about doing it in person, talking with friends and children and everything. I think setting up in-person things, I know when I was working at summer camp last year, we went to libraries and things like that, right? And had presentation stuff there. I think we could do something like a public thing where the master could do just any kind of community organization can do, set up in-person venues or whatever at a library or somewhere, maybe at some park or something like that. And you talk about this kind of stuff because I see a lot of social media too. When someone's talking about a thing, they do a game or something, a video game that has a very big message and everything, and they're oh, let's talk about this. And people are let's play the game, man. Why are you talking about this? Just let's just play the game. No, there's something here to talk about. It's a TV show. There's something here to talk about. A movie to talk about here. It's people don't just make things for the sake of it. It's with a lot of saying, but did I just make this world to just for you to just play in it? It's no, there's something here. And the same thing with a human. I make something to say something to you. That's why I make art. That's why people make art. To send something to say that perspective to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just saying, just lines on a piece of paper, pixel on the screen, you're not engaged. You're turning your brain off. Think something. Think about something. So I feel we need actually do that to people, to and for people, with people. Do something in person.
Yeah.
Because you got a film festival.
Yeah.
Take advantage of when people express the interest, right? So to your point, people a lot of the time just want to play the game. They just want to, me and my brother having a debate about Kendrick versus Drake. He was like, where are the bops? Okay. Respectfully, the message is great and all, but, these number ones over here are what gets replayed in the car, right? So I think that it is about, when you see the interest, when the interest sparks, we have to hop on that. So I'm going to just close with oh, we do? Oh, hi, y'all.
Sister Ressa, can you unmute yourself? Sister Ressa?
I'm here.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, excellent presentation, Naila. So my question is, you talked about some themes, some things that you noticed, some things that got people talking, and I was wondering I don't know how to say this other than to say from a positive perspective, have you seen things that are, I guess, deemed more positive that we could also take advantage of? When we talk about kind of the murder of the CEO, the Kendrick Lamar, Drake beef, or other elements, those might be considered kind of negative, even though they were talked about. But are there some things that might be deemed more positive or kind of trend up in a positive direction that we could leverage and talk more about and have conversations about?
Sure. So from a media perspective, I would really have to think on it. Negativity fuels the algorithms, that kind of thing. But I will say one thing that I have seen is, you know, kind of out of the realization that, like, these systems aren't going to save us, right? I have seen a real uptick in community-based initiatives and, like, people really going, all right, well, we got to figure out what we're going to do, right? And one of the things I've seen that I've really appreciated has been this concept of mutual aid, which is when community members just kind of independently are supporting one another in different spaces. So whether that is holding, you know, a Thanksgiving food drive and just having food out there for folks to take. We're not going to ask you, we're not a nonprofit that's going to ask you, well, how much money do you make, right? If you came all this way across town because you want some vegetables, we're going to give it to you, right? To seeing folks saying, you know, okay, in spite of the healthcare system, right? In spite of what it is and how it operates, how many GoFundMes have you seen of people making sure that folks get the care that they need? Like, I think that even in those dark moments, even in these systems that are oppressive, that are not care-based, right, we are seeing people pivot and move around. And I'm always encouraged by that shift, by seeing folks say, all right, well, this is over here and this is existing, and I'm only one person, and there's not that there's nothing I can do, but I'm only one person, right? To saying, okay, well, what can I do? I can make sure that the young people around me have access to everything that they need to be successful. The young people around me are going to be encouraged to seek knowledge. They're going to be encouraged to ask questions, right? I think that all of those shifts are really important and positive. And just continuing to engage in positive media as well when you can find it. Again, negativity sells, right? Algorithms don't care if the engagement is positive or negative. One thing that I noticed on my own personal social media was that there was one day where I was scrolling through Instagram, and I kept seeing things that were so incredibly negative. And I was like, why? Today of all days, I'm confused as to why everything I scroll to is racist or, like, you know, discriminatory in some fashion. It's because people were engaging with it. And so what I did, a positive choice I made, was on Instagram, you can say, I don't want to interact with this person anymore. I don't want to see this kind of content, whatever. I am personally building my own algorithm that speaks to the things that I want to see. And my algorithm is not going to be completely positive all the time, right? I want to see the conversations around the death of the CEO, right? I want to be engaged in those conversations, but I also want to see Black joy. I want to see folks just dancing and having fun. I want to see folks talking about the books that they read that really positively impacted them, right? I'm always trying to develop balance, both, which I think is really important, you know, both Islamically, but also just kind of in the secular aspects that we have to engage with, right? Like, I need a balance of both, and I think I'm always trying to find that, and it can be difficult sometimes. So the answer is no. Everything I saw was negative. But we're going to get there. We're going to get there. So I wanted to share some of the media that I encourage folks to look at. So Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. I saw folks engaging with that on social media. I saw one beloved individual who said, okay, can you just give me the ending to the book? And I was like, yeah, no, that's not what we're doing here. To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar is what I mentioned. Wicked, the book, the movie, or the play. There's actually a really great video essay by a man named FD Signifier on YouTube. He has one that's really popular around that Kendrick Lamar Drake beef called I'm With the Culture Feeling. But he also has one on Diddy. He has one on electoral politics. Really, really interesting perspective. So I do encourage folks to engage with that. And yeah, thanks for being here, both in person and online. These were very kind of, shuffled together thoughts. But I do think that if we can find a way to leverage what people are already discussing, we will be able to increase interaction with our community, and to engage folks who may not otherwise feel comfortable kind of in religious spaces or having religious conversations. So I do encourage you all to kind of put your ear to the ground. Don't be in it all the time. Don't get sucked into, an algorithmic, loop of negativity. But do pay attention when you hear your grandchild mention something that's going on social media. Do pay attention when you see a news headline and it doesn't quite match up with your known and lived experience. Interrogate that. Look at that. See, how these kind of big pop culture moments, these big media headlines, how does that trickle down to what people's lived experiences are, and how can we better speak to what people are feeling and experiencing. So thank y'all. Assalamu alaikum.
Excellent job, sister. Excellent job, Sister Naila. We'd like to state that to congratulate Brother Imam Nasif Ibn and Sister Hania on their. You want to say something?
I'm just happy. They had delivered yesterday, and the Nasif Ibn delivered the baby. Later on, the people came, and but that was interesting. I don't think I'll have the gumption for that, but alhamdulillah, his name is Zaid Muhammad Majid. Yes, alhamdulillah.
All right, we'll go and close out with a dua. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Our Lord grant us the good of this life, the good of the hereafter, and protect us from the torment of the fire. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum. And we thank for everybody for their participation today. Assalamu alaikum.